Hello and welcome to the Identity Podcast presented to you by Find Your ID NYC. Of course, don't forget to check out the Identity Podcast every single Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time. That's right, via Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, all at the Identity Podcast every single Wednesday. Of course, check out the Identity Podcast on all streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Follow us on all social media platforms, including TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And if you love the Identity Podcast and want to sponsor us, well, guess what? You can. All you have to do is email us at press@findyouridnyc.com, and we'll get back to you with more details. Of course, we are in the month of June now, June 2nd to be exact, and we're so grateful to be here. It's just an honor as always to be able to host the Identity Podcast. Of course, I'm Caleb, one of your co-hosts, and with my fellow and lovely co-host, Tark, who's outside. Look how beautiful it is out there. Just absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Well, we're both very grateful to welcome our very special guest this week's show, Real Talk, featuring Jill Devine, a radio and podcast personality. I think she's pretty cool because she's like me, and that's pretty cool. Welcome, Jill, to the show. How are you today?
Welcome,
I'm good.
Jill.
Thank you, guys. This is exciting.
Yeah, this is our first radio host on ever. So
I know.
Definitely
I'm excited.
Get a bell for that one.
Even though it's former radio host, do I still get the bell?
Well, I'd love to hear more about what that means.
Okay.
But Caleb is our resident radio host voice, so we often make a joke of to radio and go back, and sometimes has issues not being on his radio voice. So is that something you've ever experienced along your journey, or?
Well, it's funny because when I would meet people and they would say, "Is this your radio voice?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? I use my normal voice. That's how I talk." But there was a big thing back in the day where a lot of, and not necessarily women, but men, it was like they turned it on to a certain kind of voice, and it was not anything like they sounded when you really met them in person. So I always joked around. I'm like, "No, this is me. This is what you get." They're like, "No, turn on your radio voice." This is it.
I get that quite often. And I think it's so funny. Tarek and a lot of our guests will be like, "Oh man, radio voice." And I'm like, "But this is my regular voice," you know?
Yep. What you hear is what you get.
Exactly. Right? I do think with radio, sometimes we inflect a little bit more, and there are certain things, certain words maybe that maybe sound different than how I would regularly talk. But in general, I feel like my podcast and radio voice is very similar to just how I talk. But I do find it funny anytime I talk to maybe friends or family, and they're like, "Okay, you don't have to use your radio voice on me."
Hitting them where it hurts. No, I feel like the diction, the enunciation, it's been a process, man. So as I always go, as everyone knows with our episodes, we always want to know, what is your journey? What made you get started with radio? And I know, what was your first radio that you listened, what radio station that you listened to that made you like, I could do this,
It's interesting because when I look back, I see that I was setting myself up in my childhood in a way. Like I remember recording songs, on the cassette player and listening back. And that was how you listen to things, rewind, fast forward. And then when I was in high school, one of the local radio stations did this School That Rules, and it was with Rick Idle. I don't know if you're familiar with Rick Idle, but he, his name is Todd Newton, and he does game show hosting now too sometimes.
Wow.
Well, he was a big deal, and so he would always have it sounds bad, but the cheerleaders in the studio with them. And, at that time it was okay, but no, we all went as a squad. And I remember going and really like answering the questions and being into the music that he was asking about. And so really what happened was I went to school initially, when I started college, to be a teacher. I wanted to be a speech and theater teacher. I thought it was great. I loved it in high school. And then I was told that I needed to have a minor in English. I would need to teach English too. And I was like, I'm out. Nope, that's not for me. And so I knew that I wanted to do something creative. It was super important to me from the get-go that whatever I do, it has to be creative and it has to be something that I love to do. It's not about the money. And at the time, my aunt had worked for the traffic department for a TV and radio cluster. So it is very true when I say I literally woke up and thought, I wonder what radio would be like. And she got me an informational interview. And honestly, at that time, all I really wanted to do was behind the scenes stuff, production and promotion. And they said, listen, the best way to get into radio is to get an internship. But in the St. Louis area where I'm from, you need to go to school to get college credit because that's the way it works in the St. Louis area. So I went to Lindenwood, and that's local, and everything happened from there. Got an internship and then just worked my butt off and just had a really great, a little over 20 plus years in the radio world.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, you're using that English degree now. No, I'm joking. I think that's so funny that you were like, nope, not doing that.
No,
not doing this. And I think a lot of what we've talked about along our journeys is kind of figuring it out. Like, hey, look, this is what I want to do, or this is not what I want to do. And I think that's all part of the journey, all part of the process. A lot of people don't like, you could be hosting game shows right now. Who knows, you know?
Right.
Maybe,
right.
You know, but you chose to go along this path and kind of like build up these skills. So I think that's just awesome that you just woke up one day and chose to do it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, forgive me if you can't hear a lot of traffic going on. But yeah, I really just wanted to get into like what kind of got you into your specific radio theme now after you kind of went through that process.
So I lost my radio job in 2019.
Wow.
That was the end, and that was tough. I am in such a great place now,
Wow.
but I can tell you that at the time and for quite some time afterward, I was not, because it's a blow to your ego. You know, I mean, when somebody doesn't want you, whether that's your profession or personally, you're just like,
Exactly.
what the hell?
Exactly,
What did I do? I didn't do anything. And I'm the type of person who, I don't know if you guys have ever heard this, that people fire themselves. And I do believe that in a sense. I do. Like, if somebody is warned, hey, you need to do this, or this could happen. It's like, if you don't do it, then it's going to happen. Well, I have always stood by that I would never lose a job because I was not a hard worker. That was my biggest thing. So knowing that I had put in the work and I was doing the work and I was trying to come up with ideas and I was trying to make things better, that was what was hard, because I didn't do anything wrong, if that makes sense. But I just wasn't the right person for the people at that time. And it took a while to understand that and to get it. And again, back to being my identity, that was my identity. That was my identity for 20 plus years. That was my career. That is what I trained for. It's what I went to school for. It's what I knew. So when that comes crashing down, it's hard. But
yeah, it's super difficult. I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, your process.
No, you're good.
In that moment, but yeah, I mean, because I didn't even want to get into 2020 yet. You said this happened in 2019, so we're not even going to get there yet. But it's something to be said about, and I was going through this myself with my career, and it's something about the arts and the entertainment careers. Like, we become really masters of our trade, despite everything else, because it almost becomes part of our character. And that's kind of the joke that we were making earlier about, when can I turn this thing off? When does the radio voice turn off? It doesn't, because it's a part of you. It's a part of who you are. And I think that there is sometimes a bit of a blow to the ego or our identity when we've tethered it to something that's this tangible, or like that's like, you know, a job of some sorts. I was dealing with that a lot, you know, around 2019 as well. And then obviously when the pandemic hit, all of that came kind of full circle. So you kind of got a head start on that, which is kind of good, Joe. But the biggest thing I was going to say is just like, I could never see you as attached to that job. You've been doing that trade for 20 years, but that doesn't mean that that's you. You know what I mean? And I do hope that everyone's learning from, you know, her process and my process too, because I thought I was just the Apollo guy. I was in DC. I was doing all this other stuff. And it was nice to have these accolades. But I really always felt like, well, what do I have to kind of go back for? You know, it's not the greatest to just be the greatest employee or the greatest worker or the greatest all this. Like it sucks when someone just lets you go. Like, I was the best person in the relationship. Well, then you got broken up with. So like, now what? Like, who are you in the midst of all this? And I think the biggest thing that I've learned through 2020 and when we started our podcast in August is self-discovery, and how we can kind of figure out, all right, these things that people valued in me before are still there. They still needed those same things. They just kind of moved on in a different way. So that's my little bit of encouragement for you, Joe, because I don't know, just having this conversation with you, I'm like, why would they ever get rid of you? You know, this is like you're being very open and very honest. But 20 plus years is a long time. They say that's mastery level by that point, by the way. So kudos to you for that.
You gave me chills when you were talking, because it is true. Like, that's not what defines who I am. And again, when I look back at it, I was not being completely fulfilled towards the end of that. And so, besides talking about the podcast, my podcast, which started when I was at radio, something that happens, so I am a Christian and I've been growing my faith. I have been on this journey for quite some time. And so now I'm working for my church. And that's like saying that still, I mean, it hasn't been that long, but it's like, okay, so now I'm in ministry. Like, what is that? That's crazy. But I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, because my position is I'm in charge of our community groups, and our community groups are, you know, it's individuals or couples, and you are growing together spiritually and relationally. And like, that's who I am. I like to help people. I like to connect people. I like to give people a platform to tell their story. And it's like, between the podcast and the church right now, like, I am filling my bucket. And so it is very, very true that everything happens for a reason. I truly believe God did that. I would have never left on my own, because what person would leave a salary? And at that time, I was the one carrying our daughters on insurance. So why would I do that? I mean, I don't think a lot of people would, unless you had some really big stimulus backup plan. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't. So I was forced, and it was the best thing to come.
Yeah, like a diamond in the rough, right? You know, just with your Christian faith, you know, like everything is refined in the refiner's fire. You know, I think the biggest thing that I've learned just from you saying that is like, you got to do it afraid, man. Like, it's like terrifying to kind of step out and do something that you really want. But the biggest disservice that we do to ourselves is like living a life unfulfilled, and really like I can do this for another 20 years. And God's like, oh God, let me send her, like, let me send something to destroy, you know, because you could have easily been still there. And I had the same problem where, like, I feel like if something crazy or cataclysmic, not to say I wanted this to happen, but, you know, the pandemic has been a beneficial thing for me. And I don't know if that's something that a lot of people are kind of promoting nowadays, but we've been saying this on our podcast for a long time. Like, a lot of people have passed, a lot of stuff has been changed, you know, even with the race situation that have been going on. But a lot of good has come from a lot of just taking a step back and looking at what's going on, you know. And we can become workaholics very easily and not realize what we're doing in the process. So I'm like fulfilled in your new journey. And it kind of reminds me of our last episode, all the people that tuned in last episode. But I think that having that social business is really interesting, like that you've been able to convert yourself to your community. And like now your business is focused within your community. They don't have to be separate things. You know, I think that's kind of the way the world is going nowadays, where like if you're making money with the people you love, and you're giving back on a daily basis, and eventually will grow into the same salaries that you were looking for before, with much less stress on your soul and your being. So yeah, that's so interesting. So like, what is your podcast about? Like,
so the podcast that I have is called Two Kids and a Career. And you could probably guess that it involves parenting.
About dogs, of course, right?
It's about dogs. Actually, a dog inspired this podcast.
No way.
Yeah. So
I was completely joking, but I
no,
was spot on.
Yeah, you were right. So my husband and I, we used to have a dog. Unfortunately, she passed away, but she was our baby. Like, she was everything. We were those weirdos, and I love weirdos like this. That, I mean, we got a babysitter for her. We, like everybody's like, she's a dog. I'm like, no, she's our baby. So then when we had our first daughter, I just remember at one point, like looking over at our dog, and she just looked so sad. Like there was no attention for her, like she's just sitting there. She's sad. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, I'm holding my daughter, and I just didn't want to hold my daughter. I wanted to be with my dog. I wanted to just give my dog love too.
Right.
And I had sent this in a text to a friend of mine, and she didn't respond. Now to her, she had just had a newborn too. So I truly believe she was busy, even if she thought I was crazy, whatever, but her not responding really started messing with my head.
Okay.
And then I eventually brought it up to somebody that I worked with, and she was like, that's normal. Like, why are you beating yourself up over that? And I said, well, because I wanted my dog versus my daughter. Then I'm a horrible mom, right? And so that's how it kind of all started. And it just was like, okay, these conversations aren't being had. So that's kind of how season 1 started and carried over to season 2 a little bit. And now it's really morphed into this beautiful thing where it is a very inclusive podcast, women supporting women, supporting small businesses. There's definitely talk, like parenthood talk or real life talk, but then I don't know if you guys feel this way, but at some point, and especially for women, you just didn't want to promote anything that they were doing. It was like a jealousy thing or what have you, or you didn't want to promote another business. And I know a lot of that stemmed from my radio days in the past. Like, you would never, like a competitor, like, oh my gosh, if you even were friends with somebody at the other radio station, that was a big, bad move.
Oh, okay.
Well, I just kind of got to this point where it's like, well, why wouldn't I feature this person? Because they're going to hit somebody's emotional well-being or whatever it is, maybe better than somebody else. And you guys get this with your own podcast. There are millions of podcasts out there, but there's only one identity podcast. There's only one Two Kids and a Career podcast. And that's all that matters. It's what you two bring to this table. It's what I bring to my table. And then it gives people options. So that's kind of how it's morphed into it too. Like juggling parenthood, but then let's talk about real life and things like that.
Yeah. I love what you're doing. That sounds really awesome. I have to take a look at that.
Thank you.
I just think, like you said, as much as we've, created our community, we've made it a spiritual thing. We've had some brothers and, some, Black brothers and just other people just all forming these communities across so many different worlds. And I think that's so helpful to have female empowerment and just be like, hey, look, you're not weird for loving your dog. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like we need that encouragement. And sometimes not everyone's there to have it. But being able to create a space where people can come to receive that as well as give is so awesome. Like, obviously she had a newborn, so she had her own thing going on, but all these little moments where we're like, wow, if there's a gap for this, that means that there's a business and there's a unique part of me that I can add to this world. And yeah, as far as the Identities podcast, there's actually a numerous amount of like quote unquote identity podcasts. But there's only one that we've actually been able to kind of propel and make amazing. So we're the identity podcast. No, I'm joking.
Let's make that clear.
Right.
All caps.
All caps, right? No, it's all joke. Not to knock anyone else's thing. But I find it very funny that you said, even in radio, that we have this catty aspect of us, like not being able to see each other's unique aspects. Because like you said earlier, you're like, I'm just a worker. Like, you know, I'm just a radio person and I work for this company. And I think a lot of people have these identities tethered to their job rather than like, hey, look, this is what I offer. Because what you offer is unique and creative. You know, your story is entirely of your own. So I think that's really awesome. I think people are going to definitely have some jokes. They're like, yeah, my toddler was walking and I had my dog in the stroller. You know, like just funny stuff like that would be really, you know.
Yeah,
But,
she's crazy. That woman is crazy.
I've seen it. New York is insane. I saw a cat get walked the other day and I was like, all right, you guys have been pandemic crazy. Leave the cats at home, please. No,
It's like Secret Life of Pets. It's coming. It's like coming true.
It's so real. It's so real. So yeah, if it cuts off, I'll be jumping back onto my phone. So forgive me. But my quick question would be, how have people received it, and how have you been able to foster that community? How long have you been doing the podcast?
Good question.
And yeah, just along those lines.
So I started the idea of the podcast, like I said, after my first daughter was born, and that was around 2016, like September-ish is when she was born.
Sure.
And started talking about things, or making notes in my head. And then my second daughter, she was born in 2018. And while I was pregnant with her, that's when I was like, okay, I want to do this podcast. And at the time, my boss said, I want you to do it too. I think that this is a really good thing that could happen. And I think that it's a need too. And it's an extension of radio as well. Because at that point, they hadn't really, I guess, explored the podcast platforms. And so this was going to be a step for that one. But he's like, we can't do it until after you get back from maternity leave, because we don't want to start it and then have you be gone for 3 months. So it officially launched May 2019, and it has been going ever since, minus a brief break when we were trying to figure things out and turning it into and creating my business. So I've been doing that since 2019. And as far as the question about community and how I have seen that, I will give this great example of the Messy Mommies. The Messy Mommies are based out of Chicago. And one day, and this was, I'm trying to think, it was November 2019, I believe. All of a sudden on my Twitter account, I got this notification that these women had shared an episode that I had did. And I was like, who are these women? And is the Messy Mommies. And I started doing some research on them. I'm like, well, they're in Chicago. Like, why would they support me? And what is this? And it has turned into this beautiful relationship. I have not met these women in person, and I feel like they're so close to me. Like we can't wait till we get to team up for something. But it has turned into, they helped. They were on an episode recently. They have promoted me, and they share my stuff. I share their stuff. Like, that's one beautiful thing that has come with this community, is like, okay, just these women sharing an episode of mine has taken it to a whole different level. And so they share with me certain things that they're doing, and I share what I'm doing. And so then I get introduced to their community, then my community gets introduced to them. And it's just, that's exactly what it is. I mean, those two women, that's my best example for how this has turned into what it is. And I'll take that one step further. In season 4 of my podcast, I introduced the Supermom shout out. And I did that because I wanted to have something within my episode that definitely, I wanted people to make sure that they were listening for another thing, just kind of another promotional idea for people. But I wanted it to be something genuine. And there's a lot of times that moms it could be a thankless job. And a lot of moms sometimes don't realize how much they're seen and they're supported. So I created the Supermom shout out. People would make the nominations and I would shout them out in an episode and then feature them on social media. Well, one of my supporters, her name is Lisa, and she has a business called Addie's Way. She does jewelry and apparel. She reached out to me and she said, I would like to create a Supermom t-shirt that I can send out to these women when they get the shout out. And I said, oh, okay, well, what do you want to do about costs? Like, how do we want to do it? She's like, no, I want to do it for free. Like, I just want to do it. I want these women to have a tangible item in their hands. And I was like, are you, this is what it's about. This is there's no hidden agenda. There's no secret anything. She just truly wants these moms to get something in the mail and be like, what? Oh my gosh, thank you. And so that's another beautiful thing. I think we're starting to see that a little bit more in society too. Like there's, not the hidden agenda, or there's less of it. It's just trying to be kind and trying to be supportive. So, yeah, those are two examples that are near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, I really do love both of those examples. I think honestly, we can kind of relate this podcast a little bit to the relationship that you've been able to gain as well, because for Tarek and myself, we've never met in person either. We've been completely, remote throughout this time because we started during the pandemic. And so we've been able to become, really good friends, very close. In fact, I mean, we rely on each other for all sorts of different things, I mean, we're very close. We're getting into business together. We've got the podcast and all that. And we've never even met each other in person. And a lot of people
How'd you guys meet each other?
Well, we actually met from the company that we're sponsored and presented by Find Your ID NYC. We met through there. And Tarek, I created the podcast back in about June, July of 2020. And then Tarek was interested in it via the founder of Find Your ID. And so she got us in contact with each other. And next thing you know, it's August of 2020. We start doing the show every week, weekly. And here we are today, with a good, successful podcast that's growing and everything. And it's been really funny because a lot of our guests will be like, I thought you guys knew each other like your entire life, like
awesome. For years. I mean, the conversations we've had just over this year has been like probably deeper conversations I've had with some of my deepest friends. And that is like I think we bonded quite a bit. It's so funny that you said the messy ladies though. Like I just love that term. That name is really funny. But we've fostered a lot of community, man. We've met so many different people, so many different lives and people we've touched that have gone on to do more podcasting on their own or whatever it may be. And I think that's what matters the most, like you said, where when you kind of step out in your own fear, Jill, like you don't know what opportunities you're creating for someone else. And I think that's what's been kind of keeping us going no matter what. Like, if we stop, then other people like kind of lose faith in some of the stuff that they're doing, So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I would like to say something that a question that I have for you that I think is interesting for me as well as someone else who is in radio and someone who does podcasting, as a side thing, as something as a good, I guess, a hobby as an interest. Is kind of this realm of radio times podcasting, right? A lot of radio stations, a lot of different markets are starting to kind of dive into podcasting a little bit. A lot of times there's oh, well, we'll take our show and we'll put it into a podcast, put it on our website, and boom, anyone can listen to whenever they want. But I actually had a really good conversation with someone the other day about this, and it was the first time that I actually heard a veteran of radio be completely honest about their thoughts about it. And it made me really happy because it showed, because for me personally, I get a little about the podcast and radio type of thing, because it's not necessarily a full podcast. You're taking the audio, you're literally just taking the audio that you've recorded it, and you're putting it online, you're putting it together, but there's still that break, right? There's still that pause of like, oh, this is where commercials were supposed to be. Boom, here's, and we are back into the show, act like nothing happened, but something really did happen, right? And so, and I think my question kind of goes, how did you feel about it when you first started kind of on podcasting and everything, and also with just being a podcaster, with just doing your own podcast? How did you feel with this kind of, not only do you have to work with the radio world, but you also have to do the podcast world? Because right now we don't have guidelines, FCC legislation and stuff like that in podcasting like we do in radio. There's a very big difference. Podcasting, I can go in here and spill the F word as many times as I want to.
Right.
I'm not going to, but as many times as I want to. In radio, I can't even think about it, or boom, and just thinking about it is a fine. And so I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are about that and how you have been able to kind of tackle it and everything.
It is interesting because when the podcasting, and as you guys know too, podcasting has been around for a little while. It's still, I would say, not super, super new, but not super, super old. We're like in the middle, I think.
Yeah. Peak popularity.
Right. So on the radio side of things, it was a lot of radio stations were already taking that audio that they were doing, especially morning shows. That's where you would see it a lot, is the morning shows, taking the audio that they were producing, like you said, recording it, editing it, and putting it up for on demand. So that's kind of what they were already doing that. And I get it. I mean, that was just another place to go for you to get caught up with your favorite radio station, your favorite personalities. For me, I guess it would be wrong to say it's not a podcast, but I think it's a thin line. I think that show, they get 2 times to make an impression. They get to promote it on the radio, and they're on the podcast platform. Okay. So yes, it's content. I don't think any of us can argue that, but on my end, your end, it's totally different. And what I believe when I was in radio was that my podcast was an extension of who I was. So keep in mind that I was on the radio. I was on the air from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. That was during, most people, their work day. So I didn't talk a lot. I did the basics. I introed music. I would do a couple of little celebrity things here and there. So you got to know me a little bit, but 2 kids in a career was a way for you to know me a lot. And my thought process was, if I can get people to listen to my podcast, then maybe they'll listen to the radio station. And that way of thinking was not supported, or it was just, like, no, that's not how it's going to work. I felt very compelled and excited I wanted to be like this podcast advocate for the radio station and the company. The problem is you did have some old school thinking that was like, well, if we send them to podcasts, they're not listening to the radio station. So then we're not going to get the ratings and we're not going to get the revenue, when it should have been looked at as, we are evolving and we have an opportunity to gain more followers and listeners and get a whole different set of revenue. And I wanted to be that person. I was like the guinea pig. I wanted like, hey, look, I'm the first person in this building, and I was to have a unique podcast with content that was created off the radio. And here it is. Like, I'll be your guinea pig. Let's make this happen. Let's figure out how you sell it. Let's figure out how you utilize all the different things within the building. And I had a really good plan in place, and it wasn't really supported. I think that hopefully it's, you know, a little bit different to give others some opportunities, but for me, I wanted to create more content off the air, a different content that showed who I was. And I don't know if I really answered your question. I'm not going to say it's not a podcast, but it's a different kind of podcast. How does that work?
No, that's great. Honestly, it was. I think it was a very open-ended question. You know, it wasn't necessarily like you have to give me a full-fledged answer or anything like that. I think it was more just curious what you thought, in your opinion, and with your experience. And I have felt similarly to some of what you said there in the realm of just being the only person really getting into it, right? That's a big thing with being when I was in college, and then also just being an employee now. You definitely feel that, where there aren't too many people, I think, in the radio industry on the full podcasting side. I do agree with you. It's not a podcast, right? It's I mean, sure, you can call it a podcast, but it's not a podcast. I think there's definitely that thin line there where it makes it different, because it's just repeating what was said on air, just without commercials and in those awkward pauses in there and everything without the music. But with radio and with podcasting, you know, you mentioned something really good, Jill, that I completely agree with you. Is podcasting allows, as the host, as the content creator, to show a different side of you, right? Radio, you can do that, but it really does depend.
Limited.
Depends on what yeah, exactly. It's limited, and it does depend on what station you're working for, even what company. Sometimes it may depend on, you know, what time of the day you're on air. You know, because if you're middle of the day where a lot of people are at work, like you said, you're not going to necessarily be talking a lot about yourself or really talking a lot in general. Instead, the music is playing, and you're going to be doing short breaks, basically talking about music, what's up next, maybe sponsored, you know, different ads, stuff like that. Ad reads, but you also then occasionally may have a celebrity, but you're still not talking a whole lot about yourself. Morning shows a little bit differently, and I think depending on the station, a lot of top 40, maybe an evening show can be the same way, where you're allowed to interact with your your listeners a little bit more, can talk a little bit more about yourself, stuff like that. But at the same time, it's very limited. A podcast, we could literally, Tarek and myself could literally come on here every single week and only talk about ourselves if we really wanted to, you know? And I'm sure there'd still be someone interested, because, you know, there's someone interested in everything. But I feel like with podcasting, there's definitely just a different level to it that allows us to really expand more. And so for you've been able to two kids in a career, you've been able to expand on who you are, and you've been able to connect with people that you never thought you'd be able to connect with. And that's the same thing with the Identity Podcast. We've been able to connect with individuals all across the world that we would have never imagined. It's truly ridiculous. Like we have friends in Germany and India now because they've been able to come on the show.
That's cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. To be a little biased, Tarek loves to mention it too, but
I think that's super awesome, man. Like, this conversation is something that we can definitely continue to have. Like, you know, it's almost like you're leaning more podcast than radio, Caleb, but you don't mind doing radio as a job. But I think that what we were getting back to is that he's ouch, right? No, I'm just joking. But I'm saying, like, in the sense of that, there's a much more freedom of expression, and all your talents that were used in radio aren't being like sucked dry by commercials or whatever needs to be said. What's being said, it's almost like what wants to be said, and it's like what the viewers are looking for. I'm curious why people tune into radio as opposed to podcasting. I wonder if it's just two different demographics, or is it just like the way it's handled? One is more commercial, and the other one is not necessarily trying to be monetized. Like Joe Rogan's podcast, you've seen some of the most ridiculous things happening. You know, like, I mean, and that's nowhere
the Joe
near
Rogan
radio,
experience.
An experience, exactly. He wouldn't even probably call it a podcast, but
he froze up.
Yep, we lost him. But
I think I'd like to actually answer
you know,
that
seeing
question.
Elon Musk do something that he would never do. Oh, am I going in and out? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you did,
okay.
but
okay.
I wanted to kind of maybe answer that question about the why choose radio.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard because you being in New York City, Tarek, that is completely different than even being in St. Louis. And I think one of the things that people love about radio here is the locality of it, being local, and also identifying with some of the DJs who have been around. Because what's really crazy about this market is when you're in it, like you can be in it. So we have some like legendary DJs that are on the air. So there's like that sense of friendship there, even if you don't know them. So I think it's completely different than New York, where, in my opinion, not that the jocks are unattainable, but in a way they are. Like you have the Howard Sterns. I mean, I know he's satellite now, but he would be syndicated on everything. And so it's two different areas as far as why people do listen to radio. I do 100% put everything behind. You can't beat something that's not local. I mean, when you have somebody that can give you the traffic and the weather and talk about things in your area, it does make you just feel connected. But I also believe that people are finding other outlets like podcasting or the way that they listen to their music. And it is something that has to be thought about. I remember even just 10 years ago, people are like, radio's going to die. Radio's not going to exist. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but I have to wonder how the options will continue to affect it.
I completely agree with you there. And something I love to mention to people when I have this debate, because I have it often, having this talk is, you know, people have been saying and sitting here and talking about radio and how it's dying. They've been saying that for roughly 30 to 50 years now. And the biggest thing with radio is it's just got to find ways to adapt. And right now, especially with right before the pandemic, and then with podcasting really taking off, really finding its peak, really hitting a wave to where so many people are having podcasts now. And I mean, that's the thing about podcasting, is so simplistic, right? I think there are differences in both, because there are different markets, but there are differences in both as well. Podcasting is so simplistic because I could do this on my phone. Yeah. So simple, have a very simple 15-minute podcast completely on my phone. And there are apps now, I would never do it, but there are apps now, and would never recommend it, that will allow you to edit a podcast on your phone. Like, whoa, you know, that you could even edit on your phone now too is crazy. But it's the fact that you can do stuff like that, and it's plausible, that makes podcasting so accessible. But then, to touch on what you were saying, Jill, as someone who's also from, you know, close to St. Louis, and someone who is in that, you know, kind of Midwest era, you know, that area, is the fact that radio is really big here because of the locality, right? It's that local, that human touch. And I think that's right there is what makes radio so unique and so personal, is the fact that even though you'd have no clue who's talking, you may not, you know, maybe brand new, don't even know their name to the station, but you still feel connected to them in a different way just because you're hearing their voice. boom, something as small as like that, you're hearing their voice and it's very personal. Or maybe they say something about music that you feel the same way about that song, or they say something about the news and you're like, oh, I never knew about that. But you can recall, like, I remember big information, big pieces of information that I learned from the radio.
Yep.
And I could tell you
Same.
what DJ told me and everything because I had that connection with them, right? And I think that's really important. And I think it also means a lot to be that person on the other side too, because you know that every time you're getting on the air, there's a chance that you may be connecting to at least one person, if not dozens to hundreds to thousands, depending on your market. But I think that's a really important thing. So I think that's why, the radio versus podcast debate, I don't think there should be any like, oh, either or, because I think Jill and myself are great people to kind of put at that we in fact could and can do both. You can do things in radio and have a career and still make money from it, but you can also do podcasting and have a career and make money from it now. And I think that's a really important thing to add, is the fact that you can do both. It's just whether or not people are willing to do both, because the thing with radio is it's been established. You just have to adapt with the times and what's happening. Podcasting is still very much figuring out what's happening, looking at the waves, kind of seeing where it's going to go. And I think what is another, I'm sorry, I'm going on a long rant. I think what's definitely interesting between the two is that with radio, there are very distinct formats, right? Not only do you have your smaller markets, your larger markets and stuff like that, but you also have your top 40, your AAA, your alternative, you have your just your classic rock, your sports, all that stuff. Podcasting, you could make a podcast about anything, and you don't have to label it into a certain market. You're not putting it on a network for only certain type of podcasts. A lot of networks, it's like, we specialize in comedy, like maybe Earwolf, we specialize in comedy, but anything under comedy, we'll have it on our podcast. There's some really good networks out there that do all kinds of random podcasts because they're getting listeners, they're getting demographics from all over the place, and it allows them to reach all over the place. And so there's definitely distinct differences there. And to answer Tark's question, I don't necessarily know if I'm leaning towards podcast over radio. Fact that I understand that there's a good equal 50-50 for both, and there's perks on both as well, but there are also downsides for both. You don't have that local personal touch with podcasts as well you do with radio, because podcasts, I get to stick around for an hour. With radio, I might be doing a 3 to 5 hour shift, but you're probably only going to hear my voice a handful of times, right? Very big differences there. But sorry for taking up a very long amount of time.
We're over here. I just wanted to make sure that Jill got a chance to really explain, like, how do you identify yourself in the midst of all of this debate? How do you see yourself, and how do you see yourself moving forward? We want to make sure we get all your socials out and promote you as we can.
That's awesome. And I will just say that I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate you guys wanting to talk to me about it. As far as how to get a hold of me, you can go to JillDevine.com, on the socials, Instagram at Jill Devine, Facebook at Jill Devine Media, and then Twitter at Jill Devine Radio. I wish they could all be the same. And then, yeah, I know. The podcast is Two Kids and a Career, available on all platforms like this one that you're listening to. And I think that there is something, I don't have this great piece of advice except for just be open and just be willing. Like, again, the ministry part is so crazy to me. Like, I am in ministry. That's part of my job now. I'm a business owner, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm also in ministry. And that's a very beautiful thing. Like, it's really cool how things come together. And if you're open to seeing what those things are when they get put into your life, I think that you will find out that it will work out. Everything will be okay.
Very well said. I really enjoyed that. I completely agree. I think you can relate to that on many levels. It wouldn't even have to be full on, for you, for you, Jill, you look at it with a ministry perspective, and Tark could look at it something else, and same with me. But I think that was very well said, and a good way to wrap up today's show. But as we wrap up today's show, and I want if Tark has anything else to say.
No, I'm just so appreciative. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to have these conversations. It's good to hear Caleb talk. Caleb really goes hard for radio. I mean,
could you tell?
He is in his own radio tower of sorts. But no, I'm just happy to have you, Jill. Like, I really want to hear more about these communities that you're fostering, the things that you're doing with the church. We'd love to have you back on, of course. I'm just happy to really have you on. So thanks again.
Well, thank you, you guys. It's been such a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Gil. Thank you again, Jill, for coming on, and it's great to meet you. And again, to have someone from that radio background, podcast experience on the show as well is always great. And I think it's actually quite fitting. Beginning of June, brand new month. And here we are for the Identity Podcast. And it's quite fitting because it is Happy National DJ Month.
Oh.
What are the odds? What are the odds there? Isn't that cool?
That's crazy.
So I wanted to give a quick shout out to all the DJs out there, disc jockeys, whatever you consider yourself to be, radio personalities. Happy National DJ Month in the month of June. So there's that. Happy Pride Month as well for the month of June, and so many other great things. I always like to see the different appreciations that are happening throughout each month. And I actually found out that African American Music Appreciation Month in June as well, which is really cool. Yeah, so that was kind of cool. And there's it's National Camping Month, so go camp if you want to do that. But thank you as always for listening to the Identity Podcast, and of course watching the Identity Podcast as well. You can watch the Identity Podcast every single Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time via our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch pages, all at the Identity Podcast. Of course, every single Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time for the Identity Podcast. Don't forget to check out next week's show featuring Danielle Allen. June 9th, that show is very exciting stuff. She's a life coach. Excited to have her on the show. I think it's going to be really interesting to hear what she has to say. She's very fascinating. So we're grateful to have her on the show next week, June 9th at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time, of course, via YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch, all at the Identity Podcast. Of course, every single day and every single week, check out the Identity Podcast on all streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us on all social media platforms at the Identity Podcast. Of course, if you love the Identity Podcast and want to sponsor us, well, guess what? You can. All you have to do is email us at press@findyouridnyc.com, and we'll get back to you with more details from there. Of course, join the Identity Podcast and Going Green. And as always, we love to celebrate the different appreciations as we talked about for the month. So happy National DJ Month once again, and happy Pride Month as well. You've been listening to Real Talk featuring Jill Devine. So thank you again, Jill, for coming onto the show. It's been great to have you. It's been an honor, and we'd love to talk to you again. And I'm sure I will be talking over and over again about radio with you sometime soon. So
deal.
It sounds great. Well, as always, I am Caleb, one of your co-hosts for the Identity Podcast, along with my fellow and lovely co-host Tarek, who's outside in the beautiful New York City right now. It looks great out there, and we're grateful to have him.
Can you see me?
Always. Say that again.
Can anyone see me? I've been frozen for quite some time.
I can see you a little bit. That's all right. You look happy. That's what matters.
Entire group of Hare Krishnas have come, so I guess this is my time, guys. I appreciate you guys so much. I'm gonna probably jump in and dance with them. But yeah, signing off, everyone. Have a great day. See you guys.
Yeah. Thanks as always, Tarek, and thank you everyone for listening, subscribing, and of course watching the Identity Podcast every single week. We are so appreciative of you. So of course, check out the Identity Podcast every single Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time, and check us out on all streaming platforms as well. Thanks as always, and stay groovy.
Today is episode number 8 of Short Stories Living in Truth. How do you know all this? People ask me, how do I know all of this? How could it possibly be accurate? Where did it come from? And where did I train? The truth is, nobody trained me, nor did I read up on books. I just naturally was born with the ability to do this. And everything that I teach, all the help that I offer others, came directly from spirit. I'm also a Taino Arawak, and I believe very strongly that a lot of the spirits that communicate with me and the abilities that I have are from that bloodline. So today I'm going to be talking about the different types of readings or education I give to others about intuitive intelligence, and I'll be telling you where it came from. How did I learn to communicate with angels, guides, God, saints, and higher ups? I grew up in a really abusive and neglectful household. I was kicked out at 9 years old. At 14, I was living on the streets, and at 15, I had my first apartment. The only way I can really explain this is that they came to me since I was a child. They would come when I was in dire straits due to abusive family members. When I was sitting in church, I was raised in Catholic school. In my dreams, it was a constant flow of communication with these spirits. I didn't always understand who they were, but I always understood that they were there for good. I really had a very strong support system from the time of birth. They would also come and give me warnings about things ahead of time, and they still do. They would come and rescue me from all types of situations that I probably would not have survived otherwise. And they would also leave me little gifts to let me know that the sun was going to come out tomorrow and everything was going to be okay. So it gave me strength and endurance. And in regards to the angels and guides, I also noticed many years ago that while I was supposed to be sleeping and resting at night, I was actually working with them or for them. Whether it was to prevent a world event from occurring or to help someone in a circumstance, I was being used to create healing in different situations, and I would wake up quite exhausted. I started researching that on my own and trying to gain access to the information that seemed really elusive and oddly hidden compared to normal dream states. I learned the way that they communicate individually and design my PAC method based on those different types of hidden languages by interacting with them and sitting in observation every time they came to visit me. The way that they behave, energetically feel, and talk to me. From that information, I designed the Dreams class as well as Coffee with Your Angels and Meet Your Guides. The myth of twin flames, soulmates, karmic contracts. I learned this simply by giving a lot of readings to the public and watching for patterns. I found that there was no evidence of twin flames whatsoever. I also watched carefully for other readers and supposed light workers who were using the myth of twin flames to make a lot of money. While twin flames held no validity, no patterns, no evidence that it existed whatsoever, I would see a ton of proof that karmic contracts as well as soulmate contracts did exist, that both had cords, meaning they could tug and pull at the other person. It could create an addictive experience between the two people, and both were backed up by numerology and astrology. Through that process, I was able to design karma contracts in past lives class. I was able to help people to cut cords through relationships, boundaries, and cord cutting class. And I was able to help my clients get free from what was a draining, toxic, and entrapping system. Life contract readings. A life contract is the agreement that an individual signs on to before they come to Earth. This is full of lessons, experiences, difficult tasks, and work that they need to accomplish while they're here. Often it's connected to spillover from previous lives where they didn't finish what they were supposed to. I didn't know I was doing life contract readings for quite a while. This one I had a really thick head about. When I give a regular reading to someone, I use something called automatic writing. So the spirits write all over the paper. Well, for quite a few months, in the lower right-hand corner, there had been a square with all kinds of information on it and always an X, like someone had signed their name on a contract. One day I stopped and I said, why is this here lately, all the time, in this lower corner like this? I had been giving pieces of important information from the life contract, and that I needed to start incorporating it more into my regular readings and offering it as something completely separate. So I developed it. They showed me pivotal years, influential years, how to reteach it, and explained to me that why life contracts are so important is because all the spirits and ancestors in the universe are trying to make sure that the client is sticking on path, that they are doing what is within that life contract, or else they're essentially wasting their time. Myth busting. It's a gift, and only those that are special have psychic or mediumistic abilities. It takes a year to a year and a half before someone can communicate with the deceased loved one. You should never charge for the readings or the healing that you give because God gave it to you, so you owe it to others to give out. You can't read yourself. Don't even try. You should never heal another person if your life is in any kind of major change or chaos, or heaven forbid, you're sick. That's not true. You should never ask spirit anything. Let them come to you and tell you what they want you to know. You can't and should not be reading other people that you know. You'll influence it. This work is of the devil. You're going to go to hell for doing it, and you're opening up Pandora's box and playing with fire. I learned that all of these things were myths, and there are many more, just by being observant and honest. When I wasn't sure about something, I would ask Spirit to show me what the truth was, and they would reveal that to me and help me out to piece things together so that I could come from an authentic place in teaching and healing others. My job is to uncover truth. Medical intuitive. This happened accidentally when a cousin of mine contacted me asking that I do a healing on her knees. It was bone on bone, and the doctors were telling her, even though she was only about 25, that she would need to go in for a surgery if it wasn't fixed. I told her I did not know how to do a healing. She insisted that I did, and I tried to do a session out of sympathy for her predicament, and when I did it, it removed the problem entirely. A few months later, she ran her first marathon, and I got clients contacting me for joint problems, and that's how I realized I was able to do psychic surgery. Based on what I learned over several years, I added some elements of psychic surgery to the Reiki training that I did, and now my students are able to go out and help others, whether it be in person or long distance, through those techniques. That's a whole video in itself. So psychic surgery ended up leading me down a rabbit hole of many different kinds of healings. And since then I had done breast implants that were leaking, Tourette's, chronic migraines, cancer. There was no limit to what I could do if I was able to intervene. Past life information. My first past life flashback occurred when I was 15 in an unfortunate circumstance while I was fighting with an ex-boyfriend. During that time, I lost my ability to hear, to see, and I completely relived the toxic relationship we had had previously. Other people who were there came to my rescue and removed me from the situation. And after that, I was always able to do it. Whenever I meet someone and we share past life history, I automatically go into a trance-like state and can recover the information. Now I offer past life readings to people where I can tell them what exactly they did, where their unfinished business is, if any healing needs to take place. This also comes up in Reiki sessions. When I'm dreaming, I also share a lot of space with others in my soul tribe, and we often come through as the figures that we were in a previous life. Let's talk about body symbology. How on earth did I figure out this system where ears ring or eyes twitch, or you have lower back problems, or your hands tingle? After so many years of having doctors fail me, I became very, very in tune to my physical body and my personal energy. When I would feel something, a physical impression of any kind, I learned to stop and ask, wait a minute, is this mine or is this others? Is this mine? And what is it trying to tell me? And often it had nothing to do with my actual physical health. From there, it was simple. If it wasn't physical health, what was the message? I not only noticed that the messages I was being given were happening in real time, so I could prove that it was accurate, but then when I started reading for the public, I was seeing it for other people as well. I developed a whole system of body symbology so students can detect whenever they have a physical impression, whether or not it's literal or it's symbolic, and how they can give the healing message to their client. Timeline. The best way I can explain how I understand timeline is that I feel it physically radiating out from me. I worked with my joy guide to help me out in understanding how I could break it down more accurately into hours, days, weeks, months, and then also into past life history. Let's talk about my PAC method, the Psychology of Energy Communication method that is the basis of my psychic mediumship course and really all of my trainings here at the Ivy League Psychic Academy. One of the things Spirit has always shown me since I was a child was that intuition is often connected to trauma. It was designed from 25 plus years of research where I paid attention to my own experiences as a child, the increase with my intuitive intelligence as a teenager, and then how it affected me empathically in particular, causing all kinds of misdiagnoses and medications that weren't working from the age of 5 all the way to my late 20s. That's why I named my method the Psychology of Energy Communication. I don't talk, teach, or assist people in anything that I have not walked. All of my life experiences have been used to define what happens intuitively. Myself, when I started giving readings to the public, people quickly came and said, you train me in psychic mediumship development. Spirit would show me what exactly people were doing as they tapped in and how we could control it. Once my training was out to the public, I would have doctors, therapists, counselors, teachers show up asking what I was doing and how exactly I was helping people they had not been able to previously help. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it helps to bring you confidence in your skills, your intuitive abilities and intelligence, and to understand that all that you really need to do is to talk to Spirit and listen to your own inner voice. I encourage you guys to leave any questions or comments below, as well as recommendations for upcoming videos that you would like to see me do. Take care.